Okay, well, Governor, thank you very much for joining us. Just for the sake of the people who are going to be watching this broadcast, it's Friday morning, and I say that because over the weekend we may get an Iran deal, so I just want people to be aware that we're not yet aware, you or I, of what might transpire. But let's get right into it. People often talk about the United States having a special alliance with Israel. I guess my first question to you would be, what makes that alliance any more special than the one we might have with, say, Spain or the Czech Republic or the Philippines or so many other countries that are friends and allies of the United States?
Well, I think our relationship with Israel is special because of the region in which Israel exists. It is a relationship of security for our country and certainly for Israel. It creates stability for the region. When I talk to leaders in the Middle East, one of the things that's clear is that they say if the United States does not have a strong relationship with Israel, how do we expect to have a relationship with Washington, D.C.? It's a source of stability. Apart from that, we clearly, as a Judeo-Christian country, in terms of our values and our heritage, we share a common bond. The source of our Judeo-Christian heritage starts in Jerusalem. And so, and then you have the democracy element of this and all of the values that come from a free country. So I think the relationship from a security point of view, from an economic point of view, from a moral point of view, and from a heritage point of view makes it unique and different.
Let me drill down a little bit. 22 years ago, President Clinton officiated at a meeting between Yasser Arafat, the then leader of the Palestinians, and Yitzhak Rabin, then the Prime Minister of Israel, beginning the Oslo peace process, which was supposed to lead to two states for two people. Clearly, it has not happened yet, if it will ever happen at all. Is it in the interest of the United States to have a Palestinian state come into existence?
I think it is under the right conditions, and those conditions are clearly, we're not even close to that. You have to be able to negotiate with a counterparty that actually can deliver. In the case of the Palestinian Authority, they have, apart from the fact that they don't recognize Israel as a Jewish state, they've never been able to deliver their side of any deal. And so until that happens, I don't think the United States should be playing a role of trying to force Israel to negotiate because it's futile. It's just not, it always puts Israel in a vulnerable position. They've shown willingness to make concessions, significant concessions, but the other side has never been able to deliver anything. And so I think we have to be patient about this. Israel is our strongest ally in the region. We shouldn't be forcing them to do anything. We shouldn't be threatening that we're going to allow the United Nations to pass resolutions that isolate Israel from the rest of the world. We ought to make it clear that we would be encouraging of a two-state solution where Israel could live in safe and secure borders, where it would be recognized as a Jewish state, and where the other side would make concessions as well that they could deliver on. And while Hamas is in existence and while the Palestinian Authority is run by someone who is in the 12th year or 13th year of a 4-year term, it's pretty clear that there's a long way to go to get to that point.
The policy of many American governments, many American administrations, Republican and Democratic administrations, has been to oppose Israel's settlement policy in the West Bank. What is your view about those settlements, and what would be the position of a Jeb Bush administration toward them?
I think the settlements, as it relates to the current Israeli policy, as I understand it, are acceptable. What we should keep an eye on is the possibility at some point in the future of a settlement that would be trading land, and so therefore in places where it's clear that Israel is not going to give up territory to be able to establish safe and secure borders, they should continue to be able to build settlements. They should continue to be able to build settlements, I think, in areas where developments already exist. Where it gets a little more difficult is greenfield spaces outside of the protective areas. And there I think we need to have a dialogue with Israel for sure. And that's not actually happening right now, so it's not a problem. But the problem right now with our relationship with Israel is it has been ruptured because of this current administration's policies, and almost to the point where I think the personal animus that President Obama feels for the leadership in Israel makes him unable to be able to deal with Israel as an ally should. So those kind of conversations should be done quietly, I think, rather than in the headlines of newspapers in both countries.
Would you describe President Obama as a pro-Israel president?
No, I wouldn't. I think it's pretty clear, not just based on his the leaks by his administration disparaging leaders from Israel, all of this kind of childish examples that is of a mature, strong relationship. You don't see that in a mature, strong relationship. And then his actual policies as it relates to trying to force Israel to negotiate with the Palestinians, the moral equivalence we get a sense of when you hear the administration officials talk about Israel's relationship with its neighborhood. I don't think he's a strong ally of Israel's. No.
Let me broaden our conversation to take in some regional developments. A couple years ago, after the Assad regime used chemical weapons in Syria against their own people, there was a very bitter debate in the Republican Party among conservatives as to whether we had any business intervening in Syria, whether credibility was on the line or whether that was just a quagmire that we should stay away from. With a perspective of a couple of years, was the president right to stay out of the situation in Syria, not to respond to the Assad regime's use of chemical weapons?
Well, take it a step prior to that, where there was efforts underway that were supported by many people in our country to provide support for the Free Syrian Army. It was an army. And this president called them a bunch of accountants and pharmacists, as I recall, or some other professional group, rather than to provide support. Support was promised, as I recall, and wasn't delivered. Then the red line came, and no action was taken. The problem with these kinds of the grandiosity of language and then not fulfilling it, not acting on it, is that sends a signal to the rest of the world. It's not just a problem of Syria. It's a problem of Russia. It's a problem of China. It's a problem of the whole world now seeing the United States is not serious. I believe had we provided support for the Syrian Free Army, had we mobilized support in the region with countries like Turkey and Jordan and others, that we would be in a dramatically different situation as it relates to Syria today. The idea that we had to admit that we were training 45 people as the new version of the Syrian Free Army in response to the chaos of Syria after the Red Line is pretty pathetic, to be honest with you.
Let's talk about Iran, because this is the big story of the week and maybe the diplomatic story of the year, if not the decade. Do you think there is any deal that can be struck with Iran that you would have any confidence in succeeding in preventing the Iranians from fulfilling their nuclear ambitions?
Based on what I've been reading, and I have no access to confidential information, no. Had the president maintained his position of 5 or 6 years ago, whenever the negotiations started, of stating that the United States objective in talking to Iran was to never allow them to build a nuclear capacity, then that would have been a worthy objective. But he didn't. He immediately, through concessions, starting in the first term and certainly accelerating under Secretary Kerry's tenure, has dramatically changed the conversation. And I just don't see how this deal is going to do anything but destabilize it's going to legitimize Iran, and it's going to destabilize the region, and we will pay a heavy price. And I don't see it being a positive, that much positive can come out of this. I think it's based on this naive belief that that the mullahs will go quietly into the night, that dictators, once you make major concessions to them, will recognize the error of their ways, that they'll liberate their own people, that they'll change their behaviors in the region. And there is no evidence to suggest that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard or that the Ayatollahs will change anything that they're doing. And in fact, this agreement will empower them even more. It'll empower them with resources if the sanctions are lifted, as has been written about, where literally more than $100 billion of resources could come their way in relatively short order. It will empower them to continue to destabilize the region through their proxies, through supporting Hamas, supporting Hezbollah, supporting the Assad regime, supporting rebel forces in Yemen, and certainly supporting a destabilized Iraq. All of this will accelerate, I think, with an agreement rather than be deterred. And I think it's this naive belief that somehow everybody shares our values, everybody shares our behavior, that is quite dangerous.
Let me offer you what I suspect the president and his allies will say, which is that if you oppose this deal, the only alternative is war, because sanctions alone aren't going to stop a determined Iranian regime from wanting to acquire nuclear weapons, so that your position and the position of those who agree with you effectively is a warmongering position. How do you respond to that?
This is the game that the Obama administration spokespeople play, that unless you're for their nuanced, sophisticated, trust me, I'm just smarter than the rest of us kind of view, then you're a warmonger. It's always pushing down someone who has a differing view. And there is a middle way that I think there is a bipartisan consensus on. The sanctions that Congress proposed and the administration reluctantly embraced, combined with the European sanctions and the UN sanctions, will have a devastating impact on Iran over the long haul. It has already had an impact. And had we stuck with it, with oil prices the way they are, my guess is that we would have had a deal that looked, if we were serious about negotiating a deal and having the patience to do it and not making unilateral concessions at the end of every deadline, we could have had a deal that looked more like what President Obama set out to do when he began this process. So I just reject this notion. This is constant. This is not just as it relates to Iran. It relates to almost every subject. There's a straw man. You push down people that disagree with you. In the case of foreign policy, that means that you're a warmonger. It's just not true. We need to have a deeper debate about this and a recognition that past is prologue. History is full of examples of when you enable people or regimes that don't embrace democratic values without any concessions, you get a bad result.
You brought up
it's called appeasement.
You brought up the term democratic values. Throughout the Middle East, after the so-called Arab Spring, we had a wave of elections, many of which brought extremist Islamic parties to power, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, elsewhere. Was the freedom agenda, let me put it to you this way, should it be in the policy of the United States to promote democratic governance throughout the Middle East?
That's a great question, and I've given a lot of thought about this, and I don't think it should be the overriding element of an American foreign policy in 2016, 2015, 2017. I think security has to be the first element, given the potential volatility of the region and its impact on our own national security and impact on Israel and an impact on traditional Arab states that provide some degree of stability. Security ought to be the first priority. And as we engage once again with the region in a way where people know that we're in it over the long haul, we can then talk about democracy and the institutions that allow for more freedom. But until there is security, until we rid ourselves of rid the region of these barbaric Islamic terrorist threats that exist, that threaten us, threaten Israel, and threaten the region at large, I think that should be the first priority. And if we're going to engage, we need to engage in partnership with the very countries who are first and foremost threatened. We shouldn't be doing it by going alone, and we shouldn't be doing it by dictating how it should be done. We should do it in cooperation with, ultimately, the countries that have as much of a interest in this as we do. The best example, perhaps, is Egypt. Go ahead.
One more question, and I know this is a subject that's very close to your heart, and that's the plight of Christians throughout the Middle East, Coptic Christians in Egypt who have been persecuted, Maronites in Lebanon, throughout the region. Should the United States have a policy of trying to help persecuted Middle East Christians, and should that differ from the way we deal with, say, other religious minorities in the region, like the Druze in Syria or the Yazidis in Iraq?
I think we have a responsibility as part of our heritage, as part of our foreign policy, to support those that are being persecuted, not just Christians, but other religious minorities, because the question becomes, but for us, who else will do this? This is where I think Pastor Hagee and his organization plays a really responsible role. I think it is our duty to do this as part of our foreign policy, to stand on the side of people that are being persecuted, not just in the Middle East, but certainly as it relates to Iran, Iraq, and Yemen. And now the brutality as it relates to Libya, but also the Boko Haram in northern Nigeria, where Christian girls were kidnapped. But for the United States, who is going to take the side of people who are being persecuted because of their faith? I think religious conscience, religious freedom is a value that is at the core of our existence of this great country, and we should be there defending it, of course, in our own country where there's going to be a debate, but certainly going forward as it relates to the rest of the world, we need to be strong on the side of people who are being slaughtered in parts of the world. And as we pull back, those threats become even graver.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
All the best of luck.